Mishmash! Kitbash Corner!
Hey, today we're doing the third episode of the Emperor's Children Kitbashing series. Though, let's be real, I don't think I've actually kitbashed anything actually Emperor's Children, it's just slaanesh Space Marines. Am I changing the name of the series? No. Do you even care that I'm saying this? No. This serves no purpose, and I don't even know why I'm talking about it. Regardless, in this video, you can expect basically exactly what we do in the previous episodes, but I don't really paint anything in this episode. However, I'll more than make up for this, as one of the figures in this video might very well be one of the best on the channel. I think I keep saying that, but that's because I just really enjoy making slaanesh kitbashes.
Ooh, don't forget your sandwiches!
So, if you enjoy it, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to a weekly Q&A stream in which I'll showcase your miniatures. On top of this, you get exclusive roles and channels in the Mishmash Discord, get to see sneak peeks, and above everything else, you're helping a guy do his dream job. Just want to say a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. But additionally, if you're interested in helping the channel even further by purchasing something you might be interested in, like Wargames Atlantic stuff like Quor or Galiri airbrushes, you can use my affiliate links in the description and use my discount codes Mishmash5% for Wargames and Mishmash for Galiri. Enough of the promotional stuff, however, I think it's about time we get to the kitbashing. Now typically, I like to pick a warband or a chapter and kitbash based on their culture and their overall design philosophy, which is nothing new. But for this episode, I decided to kitbash figures that looked cool first and then maybe pick something out second. For this first figure, I'm utilizing one of the Tormentor bodies, and I decided to give him an arm from the Khorne Berserker's kit. I decided to snip things down and completely slice away at the plasma pistol, leaving the hand completely barren, and I had options to add just about anything I wanted. Attaching this to the figure proved to be kind of a difficult task, as I didn't utilize any superglue. The arm is meant to go with the Khorne Berserkers, obviously, but since I snipped things down a little bit, it didn't exactly fit in neatly at first. Additionally, I tried adding in the pauldron second, and this came from the Tormentor's kit as well, and as you can see, I kinda struggled for a moment. But all I really had to do was give it a little bit of time to dry, and once it was fully cured to the base figure, I decided to arm my Chaos Marine with one of the older bolters from the vintage Chaos Space Marines kit. If you're newer to 40k and the hobby itself, the older Space Marine kits, alongside the Chaos Space Marine kits, had weapons that were fully molded, and you actually had to clip them to size to fit the figures. Sometimes I prefer this, as fully molded weapons are ideal for certain poses, but part of me kinda does miss this. However, there are some details on the bolt guns that are a little dated, like the belt-fed mechanism. It does look a little scrungly. So I simply clipped one free from one of the newer Chaos Space Marine bolt guns, and it looks pretty damn good. Only downside is it will be a little flimsy, as it is a very small plastic piece with only a little bit of adhesion. I guess I'll just have to do my best to not be a Butterfingers. Once that was molded on, I decided to utilize one of the heads from the Noise Marines kit, and quite frankly, I really like these heads because they kinda work universally for other Chaos Space Marines. I do kind of miss a lot of the details of the older Chaos Space Marine heads where they just didn't have as much trim, and this is kind of perfect for it. For his power pack, I decided to go simplistic and use one from the Tormentor's kit, and for his other arm, I decided to use one of the arms from the newer Chaos Space Marines kit, this being the one with the cleaver. The other pauldron, however, is simply just one from the same kit. And with this, I have a pretty unique looking figure. Nothing about this guy, besides maybe the backpack, really screams slaanesh to me, so I think it is kind of a fun way to kitbash these guys to make them more universal. It's not exactly on par with what I kind of wish for with the older Chaos Space Marine kits, but this is a pretty damn good start. I think maybe changing the backpack would have made him a little bit more ambiguous, but regardless, I'm pretty happy with how he looks. But I think it's about time we get to the next figure, and this guy is pretty special to me. Around 8 years ago, I actually kitbashed quite a few slaanesh-themed Marines, and I kinda made my own warband for Kill Team. Unfortunately though, my sergeant, or my Chaos Champion, got kinda crumbled into dust. So I decided to take his remaining bits, and I made a new figure out of it. As you can see, the first thing I really implemented to the Tormentor Sergeant was the Mark III Power Claw. which I love this cloth so much. The pointing pose really gives a lot of character. And for his helmet, I used his old head, this being one from the Raptors kit. As you can see, I did decide to leave the remaining paint job on the previous figure's bits, as I wanted to give you somewhat of an idea of how I plan to paint this guy. The old scheme is my custom warband, the Arbiters of Androgyny. These guys were a very thrown together warband that I made out of several bits, including Mark III's and old Chaos Space Marine bits. But I think with these new bodies, giving him an upgrade is pretty justified. And, as before, he did have a plasma pistol, so gluing one on from the base kit seemed appropriate. His pauldrons are nothing special, they're also from the base kit. And I think above everything else, I just wanted to see this guy get the proper love he deserves from my vision of him years ago. For a finishing touch, I decided to add his old Chaos backpack, though I will say, part of me kinda wishes I swapped the backpacks for this guy and the previous Marine. I think having a more ambiguous power pack for the previous guy would be more befitting for him, and obviously I think a more slaanesh power pack for this guy is probably a better fit. But I'm still really happy with how this looks, as it's just a nice little nod to my own creation from something that I made well before the channel started. I know this guy is probably the least interesting of the group, but it's kinda special to me, so I did want to include him in this episode. But if simplistic isn't your speed, don't you worry none. Let's get to the more complicated stuff. Now for this next figure, I'm gonna say this now, I'm not really much for alternate heresy stuff. I kinda think the Dornian heresy is kinda overblown and a little bit dumb. But I did think it would be kinda cool to make a Blood Angels Slaanesh Marine. This was something that I just kinda did on the spur of the moment. I have a lot of old Blood Angels bits, and I decided to use this old Mark IV Maximus helmet from the Death Company kit. Although this could be from the Firstborn kit, I don't remember. I picked this helmet specifically because a lot of old Slaanesh Marines have this kind of armor type, or at least something adjacent to it. But I did want to add a little bit more flair to it, so I took one of the base kit heads from the Tormentor's kit, and I would slice off the top knot. Or I guess, is this really a top knot? Maybe? I don't know. I was very careful with the way I sliced it, and I ended up slicing away a little bit more of the excess, as I wanted a very clean fit to the helmet. Thankfully, after a little bit of trimming, this fit very flawlessly. I actually probably did a little bit more trimming than I really needed to, but it doesn't look overdone. And in fact, I think this is a very well-fitting bit. It almost looks like it's attached to the base helmet by itself. Doesn't really look like a kitbash to me. But I wasn't done cutting out my old Blood Angels bits, as I decided to use this old Blood Angels power pack, and I would slice off the iconography on the top. After a very clean slice, this would actually fit almost perfectly onto one of the newer Slaanesh power packs. I just needed to add a little bit of Tamiya, but I did actually kind of mess this up. As you can see, it pulled heavily onto the bit. I don't know what I was doing here. Thankfully, none of the detail was scuffed, so I simply just placed it onto the power pack, and getting it into place kinda sucked. But once I finally got it into place, it was a perfect fit. Though it didn't adhere easily, these two lines of chaos trim made for a perfect fit overall, so I can't really complain all too much. Again, it might be a little flimsy, but once I glued on the power pack, I was already really happy with where this figure was going. I did need to add a little bit of extra Tamiya here and there just to make sure everything fit in place, but I don't know, looks pretty damn cool to me. After doing so, I'd begin giving him his weapons, and first I decided to give him one of the blades from the Tormentor's kit. I was going to give him something from the other Deathwatch kits, perhaps a chainsword, but I couldn't find any left over. For his armament, I decided to give him a bolt pistol. However, the bolt pistol that he has in his arm will not be the one that we're using. This is mostly just because I like the pose of this arm. Though if I had to guess, I believe I did this after I glued it on because I just ripped the entire arm off, as well as the bolt pistol. To replace it, I used one of the bolt pistols from the Death Company kit, and again, you can very clearly tell that this was used for something else. I did end up having to trim down a little bit of the wrist cuff, but once that was fully trimmed down and everything was sliced and sanded, it would make for a perfect fit. It's not too much, it doesn't look too loyalisty. At first I was worried about going a little too far with the Blood Angels iconography, but I thought about it in lore, and considering this guy is a Slaaneshi Blood Angel, This just means that he would have all the more extra details on his armor. For his other pauldron, I decided to use one from the Firstborn kits, and yes, this one does look very scrungly, but I assure you it's rather clean once it was painted over. I decided to add the little chalice in too, and his other pauldron I went rather simplistic. Just another from the Tormentor's kit, but I would say all around this figure is very well put together, and I'm really happy with how he looks. I did think his belt was a little barren, so I did end up giving him one of the Green Goblin bombs from the base kit as well. Though part of me kinda wishes I gave him something a little bit more Blood Angels-y, but I'm not complaining too much. With that last little detail, I was left with a very, very, very cool looking figure. At first I was gonna say it's kind of an obvious kitbash, but you know, we could go into the semantics about how the Blood Angels are everything that the Emperor's Children wanted to be without trying, or I guess sanguineous at the very least. But the bits all together look so good together, so there's no reason for me to not do it at least once. And I'm gonna try to come up with something cool for the color scheme. I'm kinda undecided, to be honest. But if you don't find this part complicated enough, I think it's about time we get into the grand finale of this episode. I hope you're ready for it, because I'm very excited to show this one off. So for our last figure, I decided to use my last Chaos Terminator that I've had sitting in my bits bin for the last almost year now. Actually, it's been well over a year. But I decided this guy needed to be something bigger, something more special. So I decided to begin snipping off some of the bits that I added to the original figure, this being the little trophies that come with the base kit, and I'll use those for kit bashing later on. If it's not obvious, I'm fitting on one of the power packs from the Noise Marines kit. However, there's still a lot of excess trim that needs to be, well, trimmed. I decided to sand things down on top of the Marine, and I would slice off the back so I could eventually fit on this huge power pack. And already this looks insanely cool. I know some people don't really like the idea of using the regular Terminators for this, but I don't care. Unfortunately, I was a little limited on what I could use for this guy, as I only had the power claws left over, and I decided to snip the fingers off of one completely. This will be for a very crucial detail later on. However, for his head, I had to do something a little weird. At first, I had to take one of the Wargames Atlantic zombie heads and I sliced off the face, as this headpiece will need a little bit of support. After I placed the head inside of the armor, I then glued on the official headpiece for this figure, this being a metal Noise Marine head from 1991. I love this helmet, it is gruesome, and it has that old school 40k goofiness. Getting this to glue in place really didn't take that much effort. I did need to use super glue, of course, but once it was in place, already this figure has so much character. The power pack, the helmet, it screams everything that I would want out of an Emperor's Children figure. Creepiness, goofiness, and to add in even more flavor, I decided to glue on the Emperor's Children logo from the base Tormentor's kit onto the pauldron. The little indents between the pauldrons on the Chaos Terminators gave me a lot of options for adding in cool little extra details like this, and we'll utilize the other one later on. But before we get to that, I then decided to give him the main thing that I had planned out for this guy. A giant whip. Essentially, I used the one from the Tormentor's kit and I had to slice it clean, and I would end up gluing it to his now bare power claw hand. I wanted to make this something similar to Nemesis's whip from Resident Evil. However, part of me kinda wishes I kept the claws, but I still like how this looks overall. Gluing it in did require some proper super glue, and thankfully, having it reach towards the base allowed for more leverage. And the overall action pose I got out of it is really interesting. This kinda makes him look all the more interesting from just about every angle too. However, just gluing it to the base hand without anything on was a little weird, so I decided to use a little bit of green stuff, and though I'm not entirely sure about what I ended up doing, I'm not sure if it was cool or not, I don't know, I basically just decided to add in this kind of felt pattern. At first, I was trying to add something akin to a bunch of different wires springing free from it, perhaps making even more little extra whips coming from the gauntlet itself. However, I found the idea to be a little too much. I was going to use the second whip that came with the base Tormentor's kit, but I kind of want it in case I want to run an Emperor's Children kill team, so whatever. over time I would begin sculpting in the little pattern. Again, I'm not 100% on this. I do think I could have done something a little bit more different, and I think going for a full-blown mechanical look would have been interesting. But I think the felt pattern could also work depending on how I paint it. It is Emperor's Children, so having more comfort could be interesting. But at the same time, I don't know, the machine idea just seems more fun. I don't really know how I'm going to paint it, but I'll get to that when I get to that. For now, however, I decided to add a little bit more to the top of the model, as I did find it to be a little barren. I think it could have stood on its own without having anything on top, but I decided to take this crest from the Tormentor's kit, and I would sand it down and apply it to the very middle of the top of the Terminator. At first, I kind of found it to be a little superfluous once I glued it on, but the more I look at it, the more I kind of like it. It does add more Slaanesh iconography, which does make the figure stand out a bit more as a Slaanesh-based figure, though I don't think it necessarily needs it. It still looks cool though, and it is excessive, which, you know, kind of the name of the game at this point. I do kind of wonder if there might have been a better idea that I could have used to really add in more detail, but I don't know, it is unique to say the least. However, I did decide on one final detail, that being the little button that comes with the base Tormentor's kit, and I would place it yet again into these little indents underneath the pauldrons. Again, just a cute little detail. I'm not really looking forward to painting it because I had to paint one for my Angel of Ecstasy, but I think if I go for a different color scheme, this could stand out even better. And though it doesn't really matter all too much in the grand scheme of things, it was just fun to apply. It's a rather snug fit, so it was kind of satisfying. But after adding in that final detail, I am now left with possibly one of my favorite Marines I've ever kitbashed on the channel. Usually it ends up going to one of these guys. Emperor's Children models just really buzz my brain. I could call this guy a Lord Cacophonist. I guess that's kind of what he's like. And though I have become more of a wargamer as this year has progressed, I don't really have any interest in playing 40k, so my ultimate goal was just to make a really cool looking figure. And I think I did just that. I'm sure I could improve this guy in some areas, but nothing instantly jumps out at me as something that needs improvement. So I'm pretty freaking happy with him. And though for the most part I don't really have any plans in terms of painting the figures in this video, this guy I know for sure I want to make look as creepy as I possibly can. The old face really ties everything together, and I think that's what I'm going to base everything around. I want to blanch the shit out of this guy. This figure's kind of a prime example of what it is I love about making Slaanesh Marines overall. And I know I've talked about this before on the channel, but there's something about Slaanesh Space Marines that just make them so unique above the rest of the Chaos Gods. Rubric Marines and Khorne Berserkers especially really have a defined art style. And though I think Plague Marines have kind of differed from their original counterparts a little bit, Slaanesh-inspired Chaos Space Marines have always had an art style, don't get me wrong, but none as concrete as the other three Chaos Gods in my opinion. So to make something that really does feel Slaanesh-y feels really satisfying. A bit long-winded for the ending of the video, but I figured since I didn't do any painting, maybe yapping a little bit longer would be preferable. But with that, I am now left with 4 amazing-looking figures that also need paint applied to them. And don't worry, I didn't forget about the one in the last video, I do still plan on painting that one. But if you have any ideas for how I should paint the other 3 in this video, let me know in the comments. It would be appreciated. But I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. Like always, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.